Did you ever get blamed for something you didn't do, just because you were easy to blame?
They said it so casually, like it was the most reasonable thing in the world, as if I wouldn't blink twice at hearing it. It's just a small family vacation, you understand, right? That's exactly how Ashley phrased it, smiling through the phone in that tone that's supposed to soften the blow, but really just makes the knife twist a little deeper. I could hear laughter in the background, the clinking of glasses, the sound of people already planning without me, and it was like she wanted me to believe it was nothing, just a harmless little gathering, just a trip for them. My brother Daniel was already in on it. My parents were supportive, and of course Ashley was at the center, the one always catered to, the one who got the most attention. It wasn't the first time they'd done something without me, not even close, but this was the first time it hit me differently. I sat there, phone pressed to my ear, and for once I didn't argue, didn't remind them of everything I had done for them. Didn't try to plead my case like some kid begging to be included. I just said, yeah, I understand. And I swear, that was the moment something in me finally shut off. You have to understand, this didn't come out of nowhere. For years, I've been the reliable one. The steady one. The one who shows up, who takes care of things, who never asks for anything in return because I knew if I did, it would only make me look needy, and God forbid I become the difficult sibling. I was the one who bailed Daniel out of a mess in college when his credit card bills got out of control. I was the one who gave Ashley a place to live when she couldn't possibly afford her own rent. And my parents? They just nodded approvingly, acted like it was the natural order of things, because apparently in their heads I was the strong one, the dependable one, the one who didn't mind carrying the extra weight. They convinced themselves I was fine, and I let them, because I thought that's what family was supposed to mean. But here's the thing, when you're constantly giving and they're constantly taking, eventually the scale tips so far out of balance that you can't even recognize what family looks like anymore. And when Ashley made that phone call about the vacation, when she so casually dismissed me with a "you understand," it wasn't just about the trip. It was years of being invisible. It was years of being told in 100 different ways that what I gave was expected and what they gave me back, well, that was always negotiable. They didn't think for 1 second about what it meant to leave me out, not because they forgot, but because they never even considered I was supposed to be there in the first place. I hung up the phone and just sat there in silence. It wasn't the kind of silence that comes with sadness or even shock, it was the silence of clarity. I wasn't going to fight for a seat at a table that was already stacked against me. I wasn't going to argue about fairness with people who had already decided that fairness didn't apply to me. I thought back to all those moments when Ashley cried broke but always managed to have her nails done and a new bag. I thought about Daniel, who always had business opportunities that my parents scrambled to support, even when those opportunities fell apart. And I thought about how many times I had swallowed my pride, told myself I was strong enough to let it go, strong enough to rise above. But strength isn't about swallowing everything until you choke. Sometimes strength is about spitting it out, standing up, and deciding you're not going to play the game anymore. So I told myself, fine, let them have their little family vacation. Let them sip cocktails on some beach and pretend they're this picture-perfect unit. Let Ashley bask in the spotlight like she always does. Because while she was off laughing with them, I was already planning something else. I wasn't going to shout, I wasn't going to confront her with some big dramatic scene, and I definitely wasn't going to beg. I was just going to stop. Stop carrying them. Stop pretending I didn't notice. Stop being the backbone they all leaned on without once asking if I was tired. And most importantly, stop giving Ashley something she never earned. That night I poured myself a drink, sat down at my kitchen table, and for the first time in years, I didn't feel powerless. I actually smiled because I knew something she didn't. While she was gone, while she was posting pictures with Daniel and bragging about family time, I was quietly planning her wake-up call. She thought she had me figured out, thought I'd always just nod along and accept whatever scraps of consideration they decided to throw my way. She thought I'd always understand. But this time, I wasn't going to. And if you're wondering what exactly I mean by that, let's just say Ashley came home to a surprise waiting for her. A surprise that reminded her that nothing in life is free, not even when it comes wrapped in the word family. When people talk about boundaries, they usually mean something soft and therapeutic, a kind of motivational poster you hang in your head and promise to glance at when the usual takers start circling. But the boundary I drew after that phone call wasn't soft at all because it lived on paper, it lived in emails. And it lived in a stack of documents that said in plain language that the house Ashley occupied like it was a birthright had always been mine to give, and therefore was mine to take back. And I felt a kind of calm I hadn't felt in years as I finally admitted to myself that being generous had turned into being used, and that I was done pretending the difference didn't matter. I let the history unspool in my head the way it always does when you're about to change your life, remembering how Ashley first moved in for a few months after a breakup that apparently shattered her ability to sign a lease like any other adult. How my parents praised me for being a good sister while also reminding me to be sensitive because Ashley was fragile. And how a few months stretched into a couple of years that somehow became the default arrangement no one ever discussed, because discussing it would mean acknowledging that I was covering the mortgage and the insurance and the taxes while Ashley curated a lifestyle where she could buy brunch but not dignity. I could name 100 small moments that should have woken me up sooner, like the time she told a friend at a barbecue that she was house-sitting for family, as if the keys had just fallen into her lap by fate, or the afternoon my mother called to ask if I could be flexible when Ashley wanted to sublet her guest room to a friend for spending money and apparently forgot that money should go to the person keeping the lights on, or the week she sent me a grocery list as if I were a delivery service with a last name in common, and I remember nodding along like a fool because conflict made the whole family itchy, and I was always the one who hated making people itch. It would be nice to say I had a single clean moment of outrage, but the truth is uglier and more honest, because I had 1,000 small moments stacked like boxes in a garage until one day I opened the door and it all fell on my head, and hearing that I should understand the vacation was simply the last box to hit the floor. So I did what adults do when feelings stop working and facts need to take over, and I called my insurance agent to remove the owner-occupied rider because the property would now be treated like the rental it always should have been. And I called the utility companies to end my autopay with a polite date that gave plenty of notice, while making it crystal clear that future bills would require a name that wasn't mine. And I asked a property manager a very simple question about market rent for the neighborhood, then watched him email me a number Ashley had never bothered to look up because free is the kind of math anyone can do. I drafted a formal notice that was boring on purpose, because boring is how grown-up decisions wear armor. I had it reviewed so no one could spin it as temper. I scheduled delivery by certified mail. And I arranged for a duplicate to be taped neatly to the door at an hour when the neighborhood is quiet and the sun is high enough that everyone minds their own business, because even revenge can be considerate when it wants to be. I also made a different call that made me laugh a little in a way I hadn't laughed in a long time, because I called the homeowners association and updated the access list to reflect the actual occupant status of the property, which meant that the guest parking passes that Ashley liked to hand out like party favors would stop scanning after a certain date. And if you think that is petty, then you have not lived through years of being the silent sponsor of someone else's performative independence. And I will not apologize for finally closing the tab. I sent a final, simple email to my parents that contained nothing inflammatory at all, only a clear statement that the arrangement had ended and that any questions from Ashley should be directed to me in writing. And I kept it short on purpose, because the truth did not need decoration, it needed a spine. People think revenge is a scene, but the good kind isn't loud, it is a calendar, it is a sequence, it is a line of dominoes that took patience to set up and will take gravity to finish, and the only sound it needs is the click when the first one tips. By the time their little vacation photos started hitting social media with captions about gratitude and family, the certified letter was already moving through the system. The utilities were already scheduled to transfer. The parking database was already updated. And the property manager had already blocked time the following week to walk the unit and prepare either a real lease at market rate or a move-out checklist if Ashley preferred the drama she usually insists she never wants. I did not gloat, I did not rant, and I did not warn her, because warnings are for people who have earned your softness, and Ashley has trained me, slowly and thoroughly, out of being soft. When I finally closed my laptop that night, I felt a steadiness I recognized as my own voice coming back, the one I had buried under the family's favorite story about me being endlessly accommodating. And I let myself sit in the quiet and notice how different it felt when the quiet wasn't empty, but full of decisions that would hold even if someone cried, even if someone yelled, even if someone compared me to a villain in a cheap movie. And while she tossed her hair on a dock somewhere and thanked the universe for people who show up, the clock I had wound began to tick, and it did not need my hands anymore, and that is why when her plane touched down and the text started, I was already smiling. Because the next thing she read would not be a caption or a comment, it would be a choice with consequences, and there was no way to screenshot her way out of it. When you spend years being the dependable one, the person everyone assumes will just take care of things without complaint, you learn the power of silence, because silence has always been my family's favorite weapon against me. The way they pretended not to notice the sacrifices I made or the fact that they rarely, if ever, said thank you, and it occurred to me that silence could be mine too if I wanted, that I could use it not as a wound, but as a shield. And that realization carried me through every step of what I decided to do next. I did not announce my intentions. I did not warn Ashley with some dramatic fight that would only give her a chance to play the victim, and I certainly did not invite my parents into the conversation where they could try to guilt me into backing down. Because I had played that script too many times before, and I was finally done being cast in the same role, so instead I kept my mouth shut and started making calls. The property manager came by one morning when Ashley was already away, suntanning on her little family getaway, the one that was supposedly too small to include me, and he walked through the house with a clipboard. Noting the upgrades I had paid for over the years that Ashley always pretended she had arranged, admiring the way the kitchen still looked modern because I had funded the remodel, and shaking his head at the way the carpets had worn down from the parties I was never invited to attend. And I watched him jot down numbers that represented rent checks Ashley could never realistically write. We discussed timelines, deposits, and the reality of what would happen if she refused to cooperate, and there was something strangely soothing about talking logistics instead of feelings, because feelings had gotten me nothing but bruises and loneliness, while logistics gave me structure, deadlines, and authority that did not require anyone else's approval. While this was happening, I scrolled through her vacation posts, the ones plastered online with captions about family bonding and gratitude for these moments, and the irony was so sharp it almost made me laugh. Because she was thanking the universe for a family experience I had been denied while standing in a house I had been providing for her free of charge, and if there is one thing I cannot stand anymore, it is being erased by the very people who lean on me. I imagined her returning, suitcase in hand, makeup perfect from the trip, expecting to flop back onto a bed that technically belonged to me, only to find a legal notice taped to the door and an official envelope waiting on the counter. And the image was not cruel in my head, it was clean, like a balance sheet correcting itself after years of fraudulent entries. In the days that followed, I finished every detail without hesitation. Utilities were switched, locks were scheduled for change if necessary, and my lawyer assured me that every step was airtight, because I did not want to give her any opening to twist this into a story where I looked like the unreasonable one. Though I knew she would try anyway, because that was her specialty. My parents, blissfully unaware of what was coming, sent me photos from the trip too, as if rubbing salt into a wound they did not even bother to acknowledge, and I responded with polite one-word replies, never letting on that the ground beneath Ashley's feet was about to crack wide open. The last night before her return, I sat in my own apartment and thought about all the times I had driven past that house to drop something off, groceries or mail, or even a check when she couldn't manage her own. And I realized I had never once been invited to stay for dinner there, never once been treated like a guest, because in Ashley's mind I wasn't a guest. I was the invisible landlord she never acknowledged, the background character who enabled her main role. And in that moment I felt the strangest sense of peace, because I had finally chosen to stop playing the role she had written for me. When her flight landed, I knew because her social media went dark, no more cocktails or sunset selfies, and I imagined her in the car, tired from travel, probably already texting someone about how unfair airport lines were. still blissfully confident that she was returning to her untouchable bubble. But I also knew what was taped to the front door, printed in bold legal language that could not be ignored, telling her the rent-free dream was over, telling her that she had 30 days to make a choice, either sign a real lease or pack her things. And, while she was rolling her suitcase up the front steps, I was at home pouring myself another drink, waiting for the sound of my phone buzzing, because I knew it would come, and I knew it would be the beginning of her unraveling. And when the first text arrived, angry and frantic, I smiled to myself, because this was only the start, and for once, I was not afraid of the storm. I had built it, quietly and deliberately, and now it was hers to live inside. The first wave of messages came in with the kind of energy that only Ashley could summon, a mixture of outrage and self-pity blended together so tightly that you almost couldn't tell where her anger ended and her victimhood began. But what struck me most as I scrolled through them wasn't the volume or even the insults, it was the absolute certainty with which she wrote, as if she believed she could scold me back into submission, as if every all-caps demand and every guilt-soaked accusation would make me suddenly cave and undo the very thing that had taken me years to finally set in motion. She told me I had humiliated her, that I had betrayed her, that she couldn't believe I would do this to family, and she layered every line with a desperation she tried to mask as rage. Yet the more I read, the clearer it became that what she was really panicking about wasn't losing me, it was losing the safety net she had treated as her right. Not long after the texts came the voicemails, long rambling monologues that swung from screaming to sobbing in the span of a few breaths, and it was almost comical to listen to her cycle through the stages of grief like she was auditioning for an acting role. In one message, she accused me of being jealous. In the next, she claimed I had always been cold and unloving, and then in another, she tried to sweeten her voice and appeal to the good sister she believed still lived inside me. The one who used to drive across town late at night to fix whatever problem she had created that day. I let each voicemail play in silence, not responding, not interrupting, just letting her words wash over me, because for the first time in years I didn't feel the compulsion to rush in and fix anything. It was like watching someone pound on a locked door from the inside, not realizing that the key had been in their hand the entire time, but they were too entitled to ever use it. My parents eventually joined the chorus, though in a much calmer tone, calling to say that maybe I had acted too harshly, that maybe I should reconsider, that maybe it's just a house, and surely I didn't want to create such division over something material. And I listened to them the way you listen to a stranger on the bus, politely, without any real investment, because I knew they weren't really asking me to reconsider, they were asking me to absorb the discomfort so no one else had to. They wanted the illusion of peace restored, even if it meant continuing to sacrifice me, and for once I refused to let that script run. I reminded them in the calmest voice I could manage that I had carried this arrangement for years without complaint, that Ashley had enjoyed more leniency than most tenants would ever dream of, and that my decision was final. When they pressed further, I simply repeated that everything going forward would be handled through the property manager, because I wasn't going to be dragged into another round of circular arguments where the only acceptable outcome was me giving up. What really sealed my resolve, though, was the way Ashley's tone shifted after a few days. At first, she tried the righteous fury, then the manipulative charm, and when neither worked she went for cruelty, sending me a text so vile, so drenched in venom that I had to put my phone down and walk away. She accused me of things that were not only untrue but disgusting, weaponizing personal details she had gathered over the years in moments when I trusted her, and twisting them into accusations that made my stomach turn. It was the kind of message you don't read twice, the kind you wish you could erase from memory even as you know it reveals more about her than it ever could about you. I won't repeat what she wrote because some things don't deserve to be given oxygen, but I will say this. That message was the confirmation I didn't even realize I had been waiting for, the proof that cutting her off wasn't an act of cruelty. It was an act of self-preservation. And yet, even in that moment, even as my phone buzzed with more desperate attempts to claw back control, I didn't reply, because the greatest revenge I had left wasn't a shouting match or a dramatic showdown, it was the silence she had never expected from me. The silence that meant the game was over and I was no longer playing. What she didn't know yet was that her free ride had not only ended, it was about to collapse in ways she couldn't control, because while she was busy burning her bridges with words she could never take back, I was making sure that every one of her actions had consequences, consequences she couldn't charm or scream her way out of. And if she thought the letter on the door was a shock, she hadn't seen anything yet. The beauty of silence is that it stretches, it lingers, and it settles like a weight in the room until the other person begins to unravel beneath it. And that is exactly what happened in the weeks after Ashley returned from her little family vacation to find the letter taped to her door. Because while she unleashed a storm of texts and calls that ranged from fury to pity to outright venom, I never broke. I never gave her the reaction she wanted, and in that stillness her carefully constructed life began to fracture in ways that had nothing to do with me and everything to do with her own dependency. What Ashley never seemed to understand was that the house she lived in without paying a cent wasn't just a roof over her head. It was the foundation of her entire performance, the stage on which she presented herself to the world as a woman who had stability, who had a place to host parties, who could claim independence even as she relied on me for every invisible bill, and once that stage was pulled out from under her, the spotlight she loved so much turned harsh, revealing cracks she had spent years trying to hide. Within 2 weeks, the property manager informed me that she had tried to argue her way out of signing a lease, insisting that I would come around. But when the deadline passed and the paperwork remained untouched, the process moved forward without hesitation. And for the first time in a long while, I felt like I was living in a reality where my decisions had actual weight, where my boundaries weren't just suggestions but rules. The utilities had shifted, the parking passes had expired, and every piece of the quiet machinery I had set in motion ticked forward without needing my hand, and all Ashley could do was flail against it, posting cryptic social media updates about betrayal and toxic family, while conveniently leaving out the part where she had lived for years in a house that was never hers to claim. I heard through the grapevine, mostly from neighbors who had once smiled politely at her entitlement but never truly liked her, that she began having loud arguments with her boyfriend about money, that bills started piling up, and that her perfect image of control slipped more each day until even those who had once envied her started whispering about how quickly things were falling apart. The boyfriend left, of course he did, because relationships built on appearances rarely survive when the facade crumbles, and she was left alone with her anger and her fear, sending me more messages that grew shorter, nastier, and less coherent as the days dragged on, messages I never answered, because by then my silence had become louder than any words I could have spoken. My parents tried again to intervene, calling me one Sunday evening to plead that I show mercy, telling me that Ashley was struggling and that surely I didn't want to carry the guilt of throwing my own sister out onto the street. And I listened with the same calm detachment I had practiced for weeks before, reminding them that guilt belongs to those who create the problem, not to the one who finally refuses to cover it up. I reminded them that I had carried her for years, longer than any sibling should ever have to, and that if Ashley was struggling now, it was because she had wasted every opportunity to stand on her own when she had the chance. And though my parents sighed and muttered about family loyalty, I could hear something new in their voices too, a note of resignation, of reluctant acknowledgement that maybe, just maybe, I was no longer the easy one they could manipulate into compliance. By the time the final day came, when the locks were scheduled to be changed and the house was set to transition into a proper rental for someone who actually respected it, I felt no guilt, no hesitation. Only a kind of clarity that comes from knowing you have finally severed the thread that has been choking you. Ashley never showed up to face me directly. Instead, she left a string of final texts, the last of which was so bitter, so filled with bile that I didn't even bother reading past the first line before deleting it. Because I realized that her words no longer had power, not over me, not over my choices, not over my peace. What she could not grasp was that the most brutal cut had already been made the moment I decided to stop being understanding, and everything that followed was simply the unraveling of the fantasy she had built on my back. In the weeks that followed, I didn't boast, I didn't explain, and I didn't try to rewrite history for anyone's approval. I simply moved forward, leased the house to tenants who paid their rent on time, and invested the money in myself for the first time in years, whether that meant savings, travel, or simply the quiet luxury of knowing I no longer had to carry someone else's irresponsibility. And when people asked about Ashley, when they hinted at the drama, I just smiled and said, "We're fine," because the truth didn't need to be shouted. It had already been written in the silence that broke her facade and restored my strength. In the end, the most satisfying revenge wasn't the letter on the door or the utilities switched off in her name. It wasn't the empty parking passes or the boyfriend walking away. It was the realization that by doing absolutely nothing beyond protecting what was mine, I had dismantled an entire illusion that had taken her years to build. She lost her stage, her audience, and her script, and I walked away not with guilt, but with freedom. And if there was one lesson in all of it, it was this: sometimes the most powerful move you can make isn't to fight louder, but to step back, close the door, and let the silence finish the work for you.